Same old man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 586 for May 21st, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Brendan,
New
here's
digs.
looking at you, kid.
New digs.
Love the digs. Brendan
Yeah.
has moved. He's not in his car or the trash can, so
I thought about trying
a little
that,
disappointing.
but that was not going to work out. No, that was a war I was going to lose. But yeah, new digs, new background. Guest room of my in-laws. I'm staying at my in-laws right now for the time being, as we've just moved out. My wife and I, we've just moved out of our apartment. We were not going to renew our lease, so we're doing some temporary housing for a little bit until we find a house. So
Okay,
that's
there you go.
the deal right now. Timing has been really interesting with this. I told you this offline, Judy, that I had a bit of a development here. So before I got into this situation, I had no idea what the timing situation was going to be in this current new space that we see here.
Yeah.
So it was kind of up in the air. We have a final date on that already. We move into my in-laws. We're here for 3 days,
Yeah.
and we got a house.
Oh, wow. All of that. And you could have just waited 3 days.
Well,
Oh
we
my
couldn't have.
gosh.
We actually settle and close on this one that we just bought in late July, so it's a bit length.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
little further down the line. So we were gonna have to be
Sure.
here regardless. But
Yeah.
hey, we have an end date, so I'll be in this
There you
background
go.
for 2 months.
It's just temporary, it turns
is
out.
just
Very temporary.
Still trying to make it a little bit homey. I got the bass
Yeah.
guitars in the background, so I
Yeah.
at least have it a little bit personalized. I gotta say the lighting here is actually a little
There
bit
you go.
better. I'm kind of okay with it.
Well, that's exciting. I love to hear that. Now that you're married, you have the house. We
Yeah,
all know what comes next.
yeah.
We all
Trip to
know
Italy,
what
right?
comes next. I can't wait to meet little mini Brendan in about 9 months, 11 months.
Or
I'll
maybe
give it
mini
11
Brenda,
months.
depending on who it is.
Exactly. No, that's very exciting, though. I'm happy to hear
Yeah,
that.
man.
So, yeah, that's very cool. I'm very excited for this week's show. There is a lot to talk about, and we're gonna start here. We're gonna do a frame by frame breakdown of my second goal of the season in beer league hockey.
Your second
Oh
goal.
my
How
god! I scored a
that?
second goal, and this one was a legit goal. My first one was sheer luck. Terrible goaltending is what it was. This one was bad defense on behalf of the other team, but
Okay,
still
so bad
a
goal-
genuine goal.
and bad defense. It sounds like you scored two goals regardless.
No, this one, the second one was much more genuine. I was out in front. Granted, I was in front of the goalie, so it wasn't like a shot from the point or anything like that. But the puck had come into the slot from one of my teammates. He lost control when he was attempting to take a shot.
Okay.
It slithered its way over to me, and I scooped it up. And honestly, I shot it on my backhand, so I didn't even, I was facing the opposite side of where my strength would have been, but
Okay.
I was able to kind of scoop it toward me a little bit, which kind of froze the goalie a little bit, and then I was able to get it just over
Okay.
his right pad and into
Gotcha.
the goal. So
That's good.
there was
Good
a
stuff,
little
man.
bit of skill involved. It wasn't sheer luck like the first one was.
You weren't maneuvering the
And,
puck like Happy Gilmore
yeah.
or anything like that.
No. And what was even more exciting about this goal is a couple of plays prior, because we were in the zone
Yeah.
and the other team had gotten the puck and they had, forced it around the boards, but I had skated to the board and I stopped the puck just in time before it went out of the zone, before it left
Okay.
the blue line, which
Okay.
means we would have had to reset, and stay on side. So I had
Gotcha.
saved the puck from leaving the zone, which meant that we got to stay on offense. And because of that little moment of effort, it felt nice to be rewarded.
I was gonna
And,
say, yeah.
so like So I saved the puck from going out, and now it took a couple of passes. It wasn't immediate. So I saved it. I passed it on to a teammate, a few other passes.
Yeah.
And in that time, I skated to the goalie in front of the net. You know, I, because I'm a big guy, so that's where my offensive strengths are.
Yeah.
So I'm in front of the goalie, and so then the puck just kind of gets to me, and now I got rewarded for my efforts. So it was really exciting.
It was all a nice trickle effect that led to that great reward. You did so many right things. There's the cherry on top right there. Well done. Well done.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're officially a winger now.
Well, it really was. It was a little bit more of an initiation process, it felt like, than the first one, because it was such sheer luck. And I could really sense that with my teammates, because the 4 guys I was on the ice with, they swarmed me, because everyone on my team, and for context for any new listeners, I grew up playing goalie. I've played goalie my whole life. I'm very new to playing on the wing.
Yeah.
And when they saw me score the way I did, the 4 guys on the ice, you know, like they cheered for me more than they would normally, because it's beer league hockey. You don't really celebrate, but because of the context of my journey, overcoming all of the knee injuries, the 2 surgeries, like just getting to that point, and
the 2 positions
like
before playing wing, because you're primarily a goalie, but you were also playing defense before you hurt your knee again.
Yeah. I'm not quite there yet.
Okay.
My skating isn't there yet, I should say.
Gotcha.
But so like that was really great. And then I get to the bench, and everyone was pretty elated for me as well. And looking back at the video, like I did not hear this in real time, but you can see the bench also erupt. And
nice.
So like that was really cool too. So like it was just like this. It was a really great moment of knowing that I can play at that level. And I mean, it's for beer league, at least here in South Florida, it's like there's good talent out there. I mean, it's you know, you're not playing minor league hockey or anything, but you know, there are guys out there that can skate, that can really play. And I feel like I'm able to hold my own, which is, you know, it's just very exciting.
Those leagues are no joke, man. They're no joke, regardless of where you are. When I was playing soccer in a beer league adjacent kind of thing, I was playing against people that were almost pro prospects from their respective universities.
Yeah,
it was that kind of thing. So
no, for sure. In my league, there's guys that have absolutely played college hockey. No doubt about it. In fact, one of the guys that is like the leader of one of the teams, his name is Craig Anderson. Last year, like he just retired from the NHL, but he was the goalie for the Buffalo Sabres like a year ago.
Yeah,
and he's
I think I remember that name.
And he's not playing goalie in this league; he's skating out. But he's a former NHLer that just retired. So like,
he's like, you know, I'm gonna play a little beer league next.
Yeah,
keep the legs moving, keep the skating up.
You know, you're playing against guys that know how to play hockey.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And,
it's not some type of random club league or anything like that. It's pretty official. It's pretty legit.
So anyway, it felt really good, and you know, given the arduousness of getting to this point, it was quite elating. But
for every painful situation comes a reward. That's how it works.
Speaking of a release, I want to talk about Luca Guadagnino real fast.
Oh gosh, really? You just have to keep, you just have to keep proving your sexual points on this movie, don't you?
Look, I think this is really funny because I saw Challengers a month ago, as everyone else did. And my initial response was, yes, it's a sexy film, but I felt like it could have used a little bit more provocation. Like it could have leaned heavier or further into its sexiness.
I think every film could be sexier, but that's just me.
For sure. You know, because that was a lot of the talk is, oh my gosh, this is such a sexy, titillating movie. Yeah. And I thought it was actually quite restrained for Luca Guadagnino. And I talked about that in our review.
Yeah,
I know that's something that we mentioned. And so like, I just think it's really funny because earlier today, Luca Guadagnino, I'm not sure if it was today, but I saw the report today that Luca Guadagnino has revealed that in his upcoming film, it is titled Queer, starring Daniel Craig and Drew Starkey. And that is a film that is going to feature, quote unquote, a lot of sex scenes. And
So
you're welcome, everybody.
basically,
You're welcome.
this is Luca listening to you
Yes.
talk about how Challengers was not sexy enough, and
Yeah.
Luca responding with "Hold my beer"
Exactly.
is basically what
That's
this is.
exactly what happened. He listened to the show. He saw my tweet and was like, look, I get it. I did hold myself back. I pulled my punches a little bit on Challengers. When it comes to queer, I am not going to do that. You're going to have a lot of sex scenes.
Hey, it's
So
going to
enjoy.
make it a very different experience. I'm glad he pulled his punches in Challengers based on the review that you and I had. For those who are listening now who haven't checked that out, go listen to that episode. There's one of the few times that JD and I actually disagree on something pretty violently. At
Yeah.
least whatever our version of violent disagreements are is basically what that was.
Yeah.
But I like the restraint from that movie. But now this is him getting back to his erotic roots a little bit
Yeah.
more. I do wonder if a movie like Challengers, if the word of mouth was sort of the victim, or at least the culprit here, because there was a lot of talk about the film being as sexy as it was, and it certainly, I'm with you, it isn't. It's not nearly as erotic as I think the
Mhm.
marketing or the preliminary reviews suggested that it would be.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's also to blame. I think that there was maybe a little bit of a miscalculation.
I agree. I do think it was marketed as this erotic, sexy movie,
Sure.
which is what the marketing should do. It's a
It
Luca
sells, yeah.
Guadagnino film, and there are moments of lavish titillation in that film. So I certainly understand why the marketing would want to lean into that. For me, it's some of the early reviews or those initial reactions that, for whatever reason, seem to continue that level of hype. And perhaps it
Gotcha.
simply comes down to our interpretations, I guess, of eroticism and what that film is trying to accomplish in terms of
Oh,
it.
yeah. Whether it be suggestive or physical. And there were
Yeah.
certainly different things that we latched onto.
Absolutely, because the initial reactions were like, "Oh my gosh, it's incredibly sexy. People are going to love the eroticism. Can the performances?" And I'm not denying that it's it's certainly there.
It's not an
definitely there,
unsexy
but-
film. Like that's
Yeah.
not what you're saying.
No, that's definitely not what I'm saying. I simply think, as I noted in that review, I think Luca pulls his punches. I don't think it's nearly as erotic as people suggested that it was.
Which is fair.
But I think that is also kind of the point. I don't think he was,
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
and which, as we talked about, and look, that film is now available on demand. So
Which
if
is
you
a
haven't
problem.
seen it,
Which
you
is a
can go and
problem.
watch- I agree.
Isn't
I think
the Fall Guy coming to VOD in like 2 weeks? As we're
yeah,
recording
very
this?
soon as well. And that's a film that is
problem.
slowly like the Fall Guy seems to be having a little bit of that elemental thing. Like it's still in theaters. People are still kind of slowly trickling out to it. Like if it just lingered there for 6 months, like films used to do, the Fall Guy, I think, could actually have a pretty decent run at the
think so.
box office.
Yeah.
But that clearly isn't going to happen. So
Imagine telling our kids like in 10 or 20 years about the times growing up watching movies, going to see movies. Oh yeah, back in the day we had to wait 6 months for it to actually come out on VHS. And it's
I
like,
know.
what is that?
It's
Movies are available
crazy.
right now.
I know. Like that, it kind of blew my mind with Challengers because, it's one thing when it's a film that goes direct to demand.
That's different.
And
yeah.
I shouldn't be surprised because this does happen often where films go into theaters and they linger there for about 2 or 3 weeks. And then the next thing you know, you see them on Amazon Prime. I guess there was something about it's Luca Guadagnino. This film was heavily marketed. It doesn't seem like a movie that's just going to be in theaters for 2 weeks and then go straight to video on demand, but I don't know what I'm talking about because just a few months ago, Paul Giamatti was on my theater screen, and in 2 weeks it was Thanksgiving, and everyone watched it at home. It's like,
oh my god,
the holdovers lasted like a week and a half in theaters, and that film was nominated for a bunch of Oscars. So,
that one was even a bigger problem. That should have been a holiday hit for sure.
Yeah. So I like why this seems to be a trend. I mean, well, we all know why. We
all
don't
know
need to
why.
Really get
It's
into
unfortunate
it,
as to why.
It's just
though.
unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
At
That would
any
have been fun
rate,
to see in theaters more often.
Challengers is available on demand. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I think Brennan and I disagree, but I think we would both urge people to go and see the film, and then you can go and
We
check out
disagree
our
on
review.
aspects of it, but we're still both positive on the movie,
Yeah.
just in different ranges, so to say the least.
Absolutely. I want to talk about something that was really hilarious that
Okay.
took place over the weekend. And this relates to the good old social media discourse. You gotta love it.
Never heard of this thing. What are you talking about?
It's really funny to me how randomly films will pop up on film Twitter and be talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the case. And maybe it's not so random because the third film in the franchise is about to come out. So people are
I know where
probably
you're going
going
with
back to
this.
rewatch these films.
I know.
But there was a series of tweets about that first Quiet Place movie.
Yeah.
They came out in what, 2015, 16, something around there.
It was a little bit later than that. I think it was 2018.
Was it 2018?
It may have been 2018.
Yeah. At any rate, it was about A Quiet Place. And you are right. March 9th, 2018.
Yeah, I was just looking up as
It
well.
was a few years later. At any rate, the tweet was talking about the logic of the movie, which
I have
you've
thoughts
already
on
lost
this.
me as soon as you start talking. Like, there are maybe times that's called for, but I think most of the time when you start cinema sensing a film, I'm out.
I was just gonna say I blame CinemaSins for this crap. I really do.
It's terrible.
Too many
Like,
people take it
I'm not-
seriously.
I'm not even going to engage or indulge in any of that. However, what was so funny to me about the original post is that the complaint was stemmed from the opening of the film. At least the initial thread was complaining about that opening scene where you see the family walking from the store. They're on their way home. And there's that moment with little Bo where he's got the toy and
The rocket ship.
Yeah, exactly. And you see the panic in the family. Here comes the alien, and then we know what happens from there. And the complaint specifically was the idea of the boy lingering behind the family for one, and then also like him playing with the toy, even though he knows the rules and the family would have gone over this. Like, it wasn't believable that he would do that. And I died laughing.
First off,
reading that because
I'm gonna say this pretty facetiously, but kids are dumb.
like you knew immediately that this sentiment came from someone who was not a parent.
Exactly.
Because that is exactly how kids are. Exactly how kids are. And
It's like, I have this
just
neat toy. I
find
can't
that
play with it now. Of course I want to play with it now. It'll
hilarious.
be okay. I
Yeah,
can't
absolutely.
wait that much
Like,
longer.
If you're especially if you have several kids,
Yeah.
you're walking along and, Krasinski as the father, I think he was he holding one of the other children? I can't remember. I think he was holding the other boy.
I think he
actually.
was. Yeah. Millicent Simmons was walking behind him.
Exactly. And her character is supposed to be watching little Bo.
Yeah.
Which is certainly a part of it as well. But,
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, if you're walking with kids and you're not paying attention to them every second, and I mean every second, you are going to start walking ahead of them.
Yeah.
One, your walking pace is obviously going to be faster.
Yeah.
And they get distracted easily. They will stop. You will keep going. Like, that is just the natural rhythms of that situation between a child and a parent. 100%. That is exactly how that would play out 10 out of 10 times. And yes, if they have a new toy, it doesn't matter the rules. You can explain the rules to a little kid 1,000 times, and 1,000 times they're going to break those rules. That is what kids do all the time, every single day. That is the most believable part about that film. You can break apart and nitpick the mythology of A Quiet Place all day long. The most accurate element of that entire film is that Bo stopped and he played with that toy right there. That is the most believable thing about that film.
It was a cool toy. I'd play with that.
Like, it was hilarious to me. Not to mention, when you remove the whole CinemaSins component of it, thematically and dramatically, that scene is there because Millicent Simmons, who was supposed to be in charge of Bo, screws up.
Made a mistake. That's the whole point. Her guilt is the arc of the movie.
Yes, like her guilt is the thematic core of that film in a lot of ways. Like, she thinks her dad is always mad at her, and that's the whole journey of her throughout the film.
The whole point is they made a mistake. I don't love A Quiet Place like most people do. In fact, I actually prefer Part 2 as a movie. But one of the things that works the best as a Part 1 experience, or just as a movie-going experience in general, the whole point of that movie is that this family makes a lot of bad decisions. That's kind of the point. They make a lot of mistakes. They choose to raise a new baby in this post-apocalyptic world. That's kind of a silly thing, right? And the fact that they choose not to live by the water where they can actually speak, that is not that's not a flaw in the movie. That is part of the point. So the fact that this family makes a lot of mistakes showcases a world that has robbed us of rational thinking, especially families. So people CinemaSinsing this, as you say, I think they're missing the point of this.
Completely missing the point. Yeah, completely missing the point, which is why I find it hilarious. Like, that opening sequence is maybe one of the best sequences in the film because it does establish a dramatic and an emotional through line that plays throughout the film. So it has a purpose. It has a very distinct purpose to why it is unraveled the way that it does.
Yeah.
And even when you do look at the CinemaSinsing of it all, it is the most believable part of the whole movie. And any parent with a child, maybe, like, I don't have girls, so I don't know, but I will say as a boy parent, especially, it is 1,000% accurate. Like, 1,000%.
There are a lot of things out there that have ruined movies. CinemaSins is one of them.
Yeah, for sure.
I still remember they did a CinemaSins for Skyfall, the James Bond film. And if you remember CinemaSins, I don't watch them anymore. I don't even know if they're active anymore. But they have this like little countdown where they count down quote unquote sins that are wrong with the movie. And for Skyfall, it has a moment of the theme song playing over the opening credits, and it just says Adele, and it counts that. It's like, are you kidding me? It's like it has lost so much of its humor, of its tongue-in-cheek kind of sensibilities, that it's now it's morphed the whole mentality of the movie-going experience, that it just has it just baffles me, and it saddens me, if I'm being honest. It really does.
Yeah, I have never really been a fan. I don't know the guys behind it. I don't
know them personally. They might be fine people, clearly they have an audience and they have a job to do.
I don't know. It's not really about them as individuals, but that whole idea, like that mentality of engaging with art that way, is something that I just vehemently disagree with. And I don't think it serves any purpose whatsoever. And, and again, as evidenced over the weekend with that series of tweets about A Quiet Place, like, those quote unquote criticisms are really not applicable. Like, it doesn't really tell us anything about the film and how it functions as a film
of the movie.
like if anything, it kind of worked against the individual that made that post, because everyone pointed out that everything that she was talking about, it does serve the film. Now we can debate about how that may or may not work in execution, but there's at least a purpose to why those things are there. And I just found that hilarious. I laughed so hard at that whole thing.
Become too much about logic and plot holes. I'm not interested in that.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
Speaking of films that I am interested in, or a way to engage art that I am very much interested.
Oh yeah, there's a lot.
I want to talk about Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
So Furiosa is coming out. I was supposed to see it yesterday, but I was not able to. I'm very excited to see Furiosa. I'm going to watch it before I head off to Disney for the weekend. my 10th wedding anniversary is coming up here
Okay.
in a couple of days. So we're going to be spending some time at Disney. Looking forward to that.
Yeah.
So with Furiosa coming out, I, of course, wanted to revisit Mad Max Fury Road. And I haven't seen the film in quite a few years.
Yeah.
So I was eager to watch the film. When was the last time you saw Fury Road? Do you know?
Probably 2 years
2 years ago?
something.
That's sooner than me.
Yeah, I've seen it at least 3 or 4 times in total. So
Okay.
I still feel pretty well acclimated to the film at this point. I can
Okay.
confidently say I still love the film. I really do.
I don't know if I had seen the film since maybe even 2016 because it came out in 2015. I watched it twice that year.
Yeah, because I
then
told you to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I ended up revisiting the film coming off the high of our top 10 show and
Yeah.
everything that happened there. I ended up watching it probably another 2 times in 2016. But I don't know if I had seen it since then, honestly.
Okay.
Maybe clips here and there, but I hadn't really revisited the film in its entirety since then. So with Furiosa coming out, I really wanted to give it another go. I did, and man, as high as I was on it in 2015, I think I'm even higher on it now. That film is a true masterpiece.
It's a
It is
perfect movie for its
unreal.
kind. It really is.
It is
really is a perfect movie for
incredible.
its kind.
I was equally engrossed by it this time
Mhm.
around. Again, maybe more so. And I, of course, put out the tweet over the weekend. I think maybe the reason I wanted to bring this experience up the most is just how godly that score is by Junkie XL. It is so stupid. It is
It's illegal.
good.
It's kind of illegal. It does so much of the heavy lifting, but the movie still
Oh my
works
gosh.
so well on its own. It's not
It's
like Hans
incredible.
Zimmer's score in Wonder Woman 1984 that basically fixes the movie in
Yeah,
many ways.
no, it's
Like the movie's still great without the score, but the score just takes it to such a level
oh
of
my gosh.
heightened brutality that it just makes it almost like it's from another
Yeah.
planet.
Yeah, it's really great. And like as much as I love kind of that initial action sequence when they first make the turn and the war party goes out there and you have the flame guitar and everything there, the drums are rocking and stuff. That
yeah.
whole sequence is great.
Which, fun fact, apparently the Doof Warrior who plays the flaming guitar player, I think in real life that is Riley Keough's husband.
Is it really? That's funny.
I know
did
it
not
was.
that.
I don't know if it still is. I'm pretty
Gotcha.
sure they're still married. I have to double check that.
At any rate, and I have listened to this score. I don't know, but like that's the one thing that I have done. I might not have seen the film a ton over the last 8 years. The score I listen to all the time, all the time, all the time.
I sometimes randomly hum
So
that
like
throughout the day.
at every turn, I recognize the tracks, like the individual tracks that you can hear on the score.
Yeah.
My favorite has always been, and we've used it here on the show many a times. If you listen
Yeah.
to the audio side, especially
Yeah.
where we do play music as interludes, I've used Brother in Arms countless times over the years.
It's a
Who knows?
classic.
Maybe I'll do it again on this episode.
I think you need to. It's already been called for. You just played your cards, man. It's gonna have to be used.
I love it, and honestly, because I haven't seen the film in such a while, I wasn't exactly sure where it played within the context of the movie. I knew it was there somewhere, but I wasn't sure which one. And as soon as Furiosa gets out of the truck and she's trying to talk, these guys into, hey, we're here for the fuel. And all that action starts to unfold. And the first musical cue from that track, as soon as it lands, I'm like, all right, here we go. And again, I'm the meme of the guy sitting forward in the chair. Like I knew it immediately. And that track almost plays out in its entirety, like as you hear it on the soundtrack, which is incredible. And the one thing that we've never really talked about here on the show, I don't believe anyway, that whole sequence, what I love about the direction there from George Miller, it's almost as if he recognized how transcendent of a piece of music that was, that we as the audience have over the years claimed as one of the best tracks from that soundtrack as well.
For sure.
I've championed it as one of, I've gone as far as to say it's the best individual track of all time. And I know I'm being a little facetious there, but I genuinely believe it's one of the best I've ever heard.
Does it deserve to be in the conversation? Maybe. I think that's at least a worthy discussion to have.
However, I phrase it that way to say this: when you watch that sequence, and obviously because of the limits of Twitter, I could only play 2 minutes and 20 seconds or whatever that clip was that I posted on Twitter.
It almost feels like that scene is edited to the music. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
Well, and I guess you're kind of getting ahead of me there a little bit because
apologies.
No, it's fine. Like I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head. I think what's so brilliant about that sequence now, and looking at it in hindsight, that whole sequence is built around that piece of music.
Yeah.
There's hardly any dialogue. And I think that is purposeful. And even when there is dialogue, Miller does not mute the music. It still goes. So you have to, I guess, listen to the dialogue carefully because it's working in conjunction with the score as it's just incessantly going.
Yeah.
Junkie XL is just on his thing, and it doesn't matter what's happening. You mostly get the score and the sound effects of the action that's taking place. That's primarily what's going on there for about 4.5 minutes. There's a little bit of dialogue, but I love that whole sequence is honestly built around that piece of music.
Yeah.
And it's not until it kind of crystallizes at the end when things start to settle down, and that's when you get more dialogue, which I just find incredible that George Miller's like, this is too good. I got to let the score be the centerpiece here. And he does.
It's one of those cases where, remember going to see Interstellar or some of those other Christopher Nolan movies where the music kind of suffocates the dialogue and it became problematic? That's not the case here. The dialogue is so moot when it comes to the movie-going experience of Mad Max Fury Road. It doesn't matter what these characters say.
No, and it really doesn't, because you all know it is in relation to the urgency of the scene and them fighting off the war party, and it all comes back to the action. But I just found that absolutely incredible on this watch. And I don't know if I noticed that the first couple of times I saw it back in 2015 and 2016. I mean, I love the film. I've always loved that piece of music, but I don't know if I've ever noticed that specifically until this rewatch.
I think that also goes hand in hand with what works so well about the movie too. I do think Mad Max Fury Road is a great emotional and dramatic experience too.
Yes.
And a lot of that it's the reason I told you to watch the film again back in 2015. It was how the film functions as a performative piece for its actors, how these actors are able to convey certain things through gestures, through facial expressions, without having to communicate physically with one another, the way they look at each other, especially Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron. But the way that Junkie XL's music helps amplify that even further, he tends to quickly focus on more melodic, minor key lines when it is more character focused, and then transition back to the rambunctious heavy metal stylings of a car chase. It's like the musical score itself almost has this herky jerky kind of feel to it. The way it switches between pedal to the metal and a more emotive piece, all within the same 10 seconds really. And it's a lot of that is to match the emotional side of the film between the way that characters look at each other.
Yeah.
And it's a well edited machine. It really is.
Absolutely. And I think you articulate greatly there why that specific piece of music is really fantastic, because you do sense the urgency in the characters. You sense them coming together. Now, by that moment in the film, and it's close to about the halfway point, Furiosa and Max haven't fully bonded yet, but they've gotten to a place where there's at least a little bit of an understanding. And you do know that they are chasing something that is very personal to them, especially for Furiosa. That really comes through in the performance. And this piece of music, it's incredible how
Yeah, it really is.
simultaneously it is the most bombastic, energizing, pulsating piece of music you can hear, while also being a work of art that can render genuine, legit tears. Like, like it is,
I know it's legitimately
vibrating
insane.
on both of those wavelengths is wild to me. Like, and
This is
I
why
don't
George
like,
Miller is such a madman.
it's crazy. Like, that piece of music is poignant. There is a pathos to it, but it also has that high octane energy. Like, I don't know how Junkie XL does it, but
I don't
it
know.
is
I don't know.
incredible. And I think it's very complimentary to what you're saying there in terms of where these characters are, the urgency of getting to the green place, why they need to get to the green place, the redemption that they're seeking.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, a lot of action along the way. And so, yeah, like the high octane energy and the emotion, like working congruently there makes a lot of sense. And building that into the score the way Junkie XL does is just, it's incredible. And it's why George Miller letting that be the centerpiece of that specific action sequence, I think, is the sometimes the best direction is just getting out of the way. Like,
the best director not only knows what works, but what works best in the moment.
Absolutely. And look, George Miller's still doing a lot of work there because there is a lot of action.
Yeah.
So you have the practical stunt work, you have cars flying everywhere, you got motorcycles flying everywhere, gunshots, like there's still a lot that's happening. But in terms of editing and sound design, it's actually very simple. Yeah. And I love that George Miller keeps that simplicity. Like, it's like, okay, we'll throw in some sound effects. We'll let the visual language of the film kind of help tell the story as well. Yeah. But man, are we going to let this music be the emotional centerpiece?
I don't think I've ever heard the word simple when describing Mad Max Fury Road, but you do make a great point because while there is so much happening, there is still a little bit of that less is more mentality where it counts. Yeah. And that does go a long way. I think that really is the secret ingredient as to why Mad Max Fury Road works so well. Is it is so we call it high octane. It very much is that, but it knows when to pull its punches in the right ways.
I agree, and that's where the film and George Miller just gets to have his cake and eat it too. Because if you turn off the sound and you simply watch the action unfold, it is still exhilarating.
Sure.
There's cars flying everywhere, as we're talking about. The stunt work, the practicality of it it's insane. Like, there's a lot that's happening there that is just engrossing to watch as an action movie. But if you don't have the sound on and you can't hear that score play, you do miss the emotional core of that moment and where the characters are. Like, a lot of the score there does heighten so much of what we see there. So you do need it. And I love that he figure out a way to have his cake and eat it too. It's brilliant filmmaking.
And apparently he did the same thing for Furiosa,
which is why I can't wait for it. Cannot wait.
I mean, you can't really doubt George Miller when it comes to a Mad Max film, right? Unless it's Beyond Thunderdome.
Exactly, but we'll forgive him for that.
Yeah. I don't even hate that movie that much. That movie has some good
I
things
enjoy
in
it for what it is. Yeah, I enjoy it. Really looking forward to Furiosa. Loved this rewatch of Fury Road. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
Before we get to our movie series for this week, real quickly, wanted to look at the Cannes Film Festival because that is unfolding right now. We've seen a ton of reaction for a bunch of films over the last week or so since it began.
Including Furiosa.
Including Furiosa, absolutely. Yeah. So we've seen the reactions for that. Reviews are out for that already as well.
Yeah, it's holding a pretty strong rating at this point right now. It's doing pretty well critically.
Yeah. Now, prior to today, I wanted to maybe begin this section by talking about Francis Ford Coppola. However, because of what happened today, I have to pivot because you and I are both huge Sean Baker fans, and his latest Anora premiered today,
Yeah.
and the reaction was absolutely glorious. Like
Is this one
everyone is raving about this movie.
Is this one competing for the
Yes,
Palme
it
d'Or?
is in competition.
I'm hearing rumblings that this one has a good chance of winning.
Based off of what I saw today, I think it has a really good chance to win. Yeah.
That would be for someone like Sean Baker, who is sort of like the 70s progressive minded filmmaker reborn.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to see something like that happen.
Yeah. I would love that for Sean Baker.
Yeah.
And it's wild because, like, obviously we love his movies. I don't know where the critics that are there at Cannes, I don't know where they stand on Sean Baker. Obviously, it's hard to decipher that.
Yeah.
But a lot of what I saw today, based off the reviews and reactions, was this is maybe his best movie, which is, I guess I can't be too surprised because the Florida Project was really well received. Red Rocket, like you and I loved Red Rocket, but I wouldn't say that it had the same kind of broad reaction. That the
No,
Florida
that's
Project
an
did.
ugly movie.
Yeah, it was a little bit more polarizing. Tangerine, again, well liked, but it was the small movie. People didn't really know who Sean Baker was at the time.
Yeah.
So for people to say Anora is his best film, I'm not too surprised to hear that, I guess. But
it's about that time, right? Like
It's-
that happens a lot with filmmakers when they're maybe 4 or 5 films in. They tend to hit that, I guess, what is that collective masterpiece for a lot of people? Not everyone may agree, but I feel like it's maybe the consensus pick in some ways. So I feel like Sean Baker's at that point where he's bound to find that.
yeah, I agree. So I'm really curious to see the film and where that stacks because I love Tangerine, the Florida Project, and Red Rocket. I think all three of those films are excellent. So
especially the Florida Project, that was in my top 10 of the past decade.
yeah, I'm really, really high on that film as well.
Yeah.
So if this is indeed his best work, it just has skyrocketed to maybe my most anticipated for the rest of the year.
I didn't even
Maybe.
know it was going to come out this year for us. I back when we
I
did
hope
our
so.
most anticipated of the year, I don't think we had much to say about it at the time.
Yeah.
and hopefully it comes out this year. I
hope
don't
so
know if,
too.
I don't know if
I
this will
guess
be
we
a
don't know.
2025 film for us.
Either way, if it's this year or next year, it's going to be one of my most anticipated.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, same here.
No doubt about that. But
Yeah, I'm a big Baker fan.
that was really exciting to hear. There a lot of praise for not just Baker but also Mikey Madison as well. People raving about her performance in the film. So really, really looking forward to that film. What did you take away regarding the Megalopolis reaction?
Oh, Francis Ford Coppola's new film. I am not surprised by the reactions. It sounds like it is both the best and worst movie of all time, which means I am very much looking forward to it. I am so looking forward to it. Apparently, there's a moment where he talked to the screen and some like staff member at the theater has to talk back to him or something like that. I have no idea how that's going to work in a home video kind of environment. But the fact that the movie apparently has this sloppy, messy, failed, unhinged ambition is what I'm here for. I'm here for.
Yeah, I cannot wait for it as well. I do love that about that film. Now, whether it works or not, and apparently everyone seems to be somewhere in the middle. Like it's messy, it's terrible, it's great, it's excellent, it's the worst thing I've ever seen. Like,
I think that's the thing. It's
like all
the
of that.
consensus, like the aggregation of it seems to be somewhere in the middle, but I don't think individual people are. It's like I've seen a lot of individual reviews saying, "Oh, this movie's actually really good," or "No, this movie's actually the worst thing I've ever seen." I feel like there is a pendulum there for a lot of people too.
Well, and honestly, like I think what's interesting about that specific spectrum is that the same critic will find themselves on both of those extremes at one point or another throughout the film.
Isn't that amazing?
To me, was maybe the biggest takeaway because whether you like all the critics that I respect and love, now I couldn't read every single review, and I do want to stay kind of fresh on it. But the general reaction that I was gathering from these individuals that I adore was like the review basically was, it's great, it's awful, it's crass, it's terrible, it's awesome, it's all of those things. And I'm like, okay, like, yeah,
Sounds like a masterpiece if there ever was one.
that sounds great to me. Yeah, I can't wait to see that. So
I can't wait for this one. I really
Francis
can't.
Ford Coppola, if this is indeed his last movie, he seems to be going out with a bang, and
Well,
I can't wait.
Well, he's got some good wine to keep him, financially stable.
For now, but I think didn't he sell that winery to make this movie?
He
So
may have. I may have forgotten about that.
Yeah, I think he sold it. Like, I think that's how he got the money for this film. So what you assume he's got some bottles left over, but he might not.
Well,
have
I know his
many.
winery has done well enough for a while, so he's probably okay. But
Yeah.
well,
I'm sure he's more than okay.
I'm
But
sure he's okay.
yeah, he'll be fine. He's Hollywood royalty. I think people will take care of him regardless of how any of this plays out.
Oh yeah, you're right. Napa's Delicado Family Wines finalizes deal to buy Coppola wine portfolio.
There you go.
Yeah, that was quite a few years ago, actually.
Yeah, because he wanted to make this film. That's how
Yeah.
he was able to fund it, was by selling that winery. Crazy.
makes
Like,
sense.
it's a wild move, but
Yeah,
just a wild story there. So another film I wanted to bring up here real quick, we talked about how Nora might be up for the Palme d'Or to win it. Another film I've heard that's really good that could compete with Nora is Andrea Arnold's Bird. Have you heard anything
another
about
one.
this? Yeah.
Another one that I didn't really have any knowledge about, if I'm being honest. I didn't even know Andrea Arnold had a new film coming out this early. I know she was working on something, but again, it was sort of another one of those instances where we didn't really know if we had any confirmation that this was coming out anytime soon. I think at the time when we did our most anticipated of the year some months ago, I didn't even know if this was confirmed for Cannes. I had no idea that was the case. But hearing surprisingly great things about this as well.
Yeah, I didn't know, like, this was on my radar because it was a film that I had listed back at the beginning of the year when we were doing our most anticipated of 2024.
Yeah.
However, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect because American Honey comes out in 2016. A lot of people really raved and went for that movie.
Yeah.
However, she hasn't really done a whole lot since, at least in terms of film. I know she's done some TV. She had that documentary that came and went a few years ago, which I thought was interesting because I do
did
remember.
not see.
I do remember marking that documentary down on my list because it's Andrea Arnold. I believe this would be the first thing she's done film-wise since American Honey. I'm sure people will have something to say about it. Crickets. Nobody said a word about Cow at all the year that it was released. And I'm like, nobody? Like, nobody's saying anything? So I ended up never watching it because it just seemed to miss everybody.
Seemed to
so I just
disappear.
didn't even bother.
Yeah.
And so she hasn't really done anything else in the film world. So I did mark Bird as a film of interest simply because she hasn't done a whole lot since 2016. But it's Andrea Arnold. I don't love American Honey like a lot of people do, but I do respect and admire the ambition of that film.
Yeah, it's one I do dig.
And here she is with Bird, and people are really raving about that one. So, and maybe in light of it could maybe win the Palme d'Or.
I feel like I feel like the talk is between Honora and Bird as not just the two surprises, sort of I don't want to say underdogs, because in the film critic world, both Andrea Arnold and Sean Baker are beloved individuals. But they are kind of the smaller films that could, when you're also playing against movies like Megalopolis. And not all these movies are competing. Some of these are just simply premiering at Cannes. But that doesn't mean that movies like Megalopolis or Kinds of Kindness, the new Yorgos Lanthimos film, is not going to be marketed or communicated in a certain, like they're going to be talked about. And sometimes that can take away from the hype around movies like Bird or or nor a long-term post-con film festival.
Yeah.
So it's great to hear that these littler films, smaller films, are having this kind of backing, which is really interesting.
No, I completely agree. We do need to move on though, so I don't want to spend any time here, but I do want to just quickly note Kinds of Kindness, which you just invoked there.
Yeah.
Played. The response seemed to be pretty positive, not quite as raving as some of his previous works. So still interested in that.
Yeah, it's not like Andrea Arnold, where Yorgos Lanthimos is now making 3 films a year or something like that.
And it certainly seems that way.
Yeah.
The Shrouds was getting some interesting reaction as well.
Oh yeah, that's
David
a new Cronenberg film, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The body horror film The Substance got rave reviews.
That might be the one I am most curious about, to say the least. Maybe even excited, because I really like Revenge.
Yeah. I liked that film a lot as well.
Yeah.
And The Substance is getting some really great buzz as well. So really curious for that film. Did not hear good things about The Apprentice. Maybe
that doesn't surprise me.
That
doesn't surprise me, given the subject matter.
Yeah, I don't think is going to, cause too much of a stir. And Oh Canada, Paul Schrader, I've heard somewhat mixed to positive things.
It sounds like a Paul Schrader film.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I should be excited, because that is usually how his films are received.
That's how it works. His movies always usually fall in the 50% threshold on Metacritic or something like that. Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case for O Canada once again.
Brendan, coffee is the best
medicine. It's medicine. It's adult medicine. We need it. We function off of it. It keeps us alive.
Drink it every single day. I very much look forward to it. It is one of my favorite parts of the day.
I might drink too much, if I'm being honest, but it's hard to distance yourself from it when you have great coffee, right?
It really is. And that's why I've had to be really careful about when my last cup is.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I can drink it too late and it does affect your sleep. And I at times have felt that.
Yeah.
But there's something so cozy about making a cup of coffee, even in the evening, after you've had dinner, and you just want that comfort cup of coffee.
It goes so well with dessert, right?
That. Yeah, I genuinely love that. But it can, especially if you drink a large cup of coffee, it can affect your sleep. So I've had to be real careful about not overindulging or just doing that a little bit and not too much, because I would drink a cup of coffee at 6 o'clock every night if you let me. So I've had to, be
I
careful.
Might too. Yeah, I've had to find substitutes like green tea if I didn't want to drink anything decaffeinated.
Yes, I've had to do the same.
At the same time, when you have a product like Coffee Cult, you kind of want to drink it all day.
You love it because it's great coffee. It's not these, it's not Robusta beans. This is specialty grade gourmet coffee where they go the extra mile to remove defects. It is pristine green coffee that they roast. It's roasted with specific profiles in place to organically render these natural flavors. So they have a new coffee that they just introduced last week. It is called Sidra Baborn. And this coffee is extremely fruit forward. I've talked about the Ethiopian Harar and how much I love that.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that a lot.
This Sidra Bourbon coffee is another level of that citrus fruit flavor. It is incredible. The big difference between the two is that this Sidra Bourbon coffee is much more acidic.
Okay.
So it depends on your palate and how much of that you like. The Harar is a little bit more balanced for me, but they're both really, really great coffee. So, and especially if you like acidic coffee, this Bourbon coffee is for you. But it is extremely fruit forward.
I'm adding that to the list.
It's fantastic. And on the other end of that token, if you want something more nutty and chocolatey, you can do something like the Sumatra coffee or the Brazil coffee.
Yeah.
All of that is fantastic. The Jamaican Blue Mountain, they have that as well. All kinds of great coffees from all over the world. And you got to check it out. So go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF and you'll get 15% off your order at checkout.
Yeah.
Again, that code is ISF. Get 15% off, and we thank them for their support. Brendan, did you know that nihilism is the sexy bacon?
I
Did you
didn't
know that?
until I saw a great T-shirt that says so.
Exactly. I was a little disappointed. I ordered one and was hoping that it would be here in time for this episode. Unfortunately, that did not happen. But
Well, you have next week, right?
on next week's show, I am planning on wearing that shirt, and I cannot wait.
incredible.
I cannot wait. But yes, we have brand new Nihilism is Sexy Bacon.
Yeah,
that is our latest design that you can go and check out at our store.
I think they wrote that line in the movie The Fall Guy, knowing I think InSession Film needs another T-shirt.
Exactly.
That's why they wrote it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it turned out great. I love it. I cannot wait to get that shirt.
Yeah.
If you want, though, we have a new Arrival T-shirt. We have
Amy Adams, baby.
the Stop Turning Art into Sports design. We have a Dune-inspired one with our logo. We have same thing with Star Wars inspired. We got Midnight Special. Look, Jeff Nichols is coming up.
He's back,
his new
baby.
film, and maybe you want to get a Midnight Special shirt.
I think that sounds great.
All kinds of fun things. Go to tpublic.com/store/InSessionFilm. That's where you can go and see all of our stuff directly. But you can also just go to InSessionFilm.com/store to see more information. We have a lot of stuff there up on our website, but TeePublic is where you can find all of our stuff directly. So again, that link is tpublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. Go check it out. Get an awesome T-shirt. Get your Nihilism is Sexy Bacon. Wear that all over the place.
That's tasty right there, man. Tasty.
and look good all summer long. And for those that support us, we thank you for your support. Okay, let's move on to our best picture movie series.
We're traveling to Morocco.
We're traveling to Morocco. We have landed in Casablanca, an all-time film, a legendary film, Casablanca, directed by Michael Curtiz. And I don't know about you, Brendan. I haven't seen this film in quite a few years. I was excited to revisit this film. I was awfully close to getting my wife to even watch it, even though she does not like old Hollywood. She does not really care for black and white movies.
I was gonna say she's a rom-com and disaster flick chick, right?
Yeah, pretty much. However, there is a way in with Casablanca. There's actually two ways in the sense that there is a romance angle to Casablanca.
There's a romance.
Obviously.
Yeah, it's a romance film.
And it was also a pivotal moment on the Great Movie Ride at Disney when that ride existed. It's no longer there. They've changed it. But she loved the Great Movie Ride, and Casablanca was one of her favorite parts of that ride. So it's a film that she's interested in, but I don't know if she can fully engage with it simply because she doesn't really like movies of that era.
Right.
And so she's almost said yes to watching it, but alas, it did not happen. Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
But I am excited to talk about Casablanca. It, of course, won Best Picture for 1943, which is where we are at now with our movie series.
Yeah.
Let's jump into it. Are you ready, Brendan?
What is there to say about Casablanca?
Well, that's the tricky thing here, right? Because I don't know what we could say that hasn't been said 1,000 times already. But
That is
we'll
my
do our
way of
best.
saying, because when we do reviews like this, JD, especially for classics, and really any movie review, right? We always want to try and bring a perspective that makes it a rewarding listen for our viewers and listeners, right? We want to be able to present something that's unique, and that's not just to toot our own horns or anything like that. We want it to stand out. We want to offer something. That's my way of saying I don't know if I'm ready to talk about this one. It's going to sound like we're
Okay.
just beating a same dead horse here that everyone else has already been said.
I think that is a great point. However, I might emphasize on the maybe. I might have a way to perhaps bring a freshness to this in context of this movie series.
You could be the hero here.
So we'll see. We'll see if I can get there or not. I don't think anything I'm going to bring to the table here is something that hasn't been discussed before. But it might be an angle that isn't talked about as much, and it makes sense for you and I to talk about.
I wonder
given
if
the lens
it's
of the series.
I wonder if it's a similar thing that I'm going to bring up, because given the trajectory of this series thus far and when these movies have all been released, there might be a talking point, especially when compared to some of the movies we've already talked about in this series.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll talk about that for sure.
Okay.
All
I think we're in the same camp.
All right. Sounds good. Let's go ahead and jump in then. Casablanca, directed by Michael Curtiz. It stars Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, Paul Henreid, Claude Rains, Conrad Veidt, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. Peter Lorre in there as well.
Yeah.
If you are, I'm not even going to read the synopsis.
Don't even do it. Some movies don't need it. Some movies don't need
Casablanca. Everyone listening to this, I would venture to say, has seen Casablanca, or at the very least know what it's about.
Or at least you've seen that poster. You've seen that classic iconography of that poster, and the way Casablanca is written in red on that classic poster. You recognize that. I feel like everyone does to some degree.
Exactly. I'm not even going to do it. We all know. We know what we're getting in here with Casablanca. So let's just get to it, Brendan. What did you think about? What do you think about Casablanca?
Good movie. That's what I think about it. So you alluded to this, that maybe we'll have a certain angle to bring to this conversation that could be maybe not necessarily fresh, but certainly serves a purpose given the movie series that we're in the middle of, right?
Yes.
The 1940s Best Picture winning series, right? And I do think there is something we can bring to this conversation that maybe relates to some of the talking points we had around Mrs. Miniver, Miniver. I can't believe I mispronounced that. Mrs. Miniver, the film that we just talked about. I think that there are some comparisons there given when that they came out. So we'll get there. Let's first talk about the movie Casablanca. Masterpiece. That's what it is. It's a masterpiece. It's one of those movies that I don't think I can pick a certain flaw in. It's one of the best scripts I think I've ever seen for a movie, and it is hard to I guess decipher, how much the final film resembles the unproduced play that it's based on called Everybody Comes to Rick's. That unproduced play was from Murray Burnett and Joan Allison, I believe their names were, and in this situation, I believe it was. It was sold to Warner Brothers before the play was ever finished, and then it became Casablanca. So there were updates being made to the actual screenwriters credited here for Casablanca, including Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, the Epstein specifically, and then Howard Koch, I think, came in to add some more political relevance given the updates to World War II at that time that it was being made. But that's a long-winded way of just saying the script is perfect. The amount of quotable lines in this movie is absolutely incredible, and some of it's actually really funny. This is actually a very funny movie. It got to a point, and I've seen this movie many times, it got to a point where I had to start writing things down because I just wanted to remember things like that's pointed directly at your heart, and then Humphrey Bogart says that's my most vulnerable spot, right? That's really clever dialogue there.
Some
the dialogue,
slick writing for sure.
It's really slick. That's a great way to put it. And I think because of that, just given the overall nature and Michael Curtiz's direction here, I think every movie to ever come out after Casablanca was somehow influenced from Casablanca. I think Casablanca influenced every single movie ever made post 1942. I truly believe that is the case.
Yeah.
Right down to, I mean, just the opening, iconography of the plane landing in Casablanca. That's so Indiana Jones, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The overall narrative structure is basically Hayao Miyazaki's Porco Rosso, right? Some of the romantic angles and the I guess the flashiness of it can even be translated to movies like Singing in the Rain or La La Land. You can certainly see the sense out here. Heck, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation is kind of a soft remake of Casablanca.
Yeah.
I think they even go to Morocco at one point, and of course Rebecca Ferguson plays a character named Ilsa, so there's another little reference there for sure. Every love triangle ever made, I think, has been owing a good debt of gratitude to Casablanca as well. So the fact of the matter is, this is a movie that has left its imprint in film history, and rightfully so, because I do think it's a very good movie. We'll talk more about the performances and what it's doing emotionally and thematically, especially for the time that it was being made and when it came out. I think there's a lot of great talking points there. But yeah, I think it's a great movie.
Yeah, this is the defining film of Hollywood's golden age. As you're talking about there are so many iconic moments and lines of dialogue that, as a hardened cinephile, you can't help but get giddy over. The screenplay is a masterclass in writing, truly one of the best screenplays of its era and really of all time. It's, of course, illuminating America's lead up to the war as symbolized in Rick. But the way it weaves in social context, larger truths about the human condition, especially with large scale conflict, the plotting and the MacGuffin here, there is so much incredible texture to the writing and how it's both extremely entertaining but also thematically rich.
Yeah.
The film is impeccably casted. Bogart and Bergman are truly magnetic. The rest of the cast is also very good. It's extremely well directed, particularly in terms of editing and storytelling. Rick's bar is another iconic component of the film. So the production design is excellent. The cinematography is absurd, but equal to aesthetic value, it's Curtiz's control over pacing and editing and how the story unfolds that makes Casablanca what it is. There isn't a false note here. It is narrative economy at its finest. It's the perfect mixture of popular filmmaking and artistic ambition. What's most fascinating, however, is looking at this film through the prism of our conversation last week on Mrs. Miniver, a film that some might call jingoistic hogwash, as we talked about.
I think it's better than that, but at the same time, I certainly
agree.
can understand that sentiment a little bit.
That might be its reputation, but yes, Brendan and I did push back on that quite a bit last week. I think what's interesting here is that Casablanca is firmly anti-fascist. It's about standing up for love and justice against tyranny. It's about the polarity between cynicism and idealism and the internal fight of desire and duty. In the context of war and inspiring a nation, how is Casablanca any different from Mrs. Miniver?
That's a good
serious question.
That is a
How
very
is it
good
any
question.
different? As the world falls apart into chaos once again, America, as depicted in this film, is a symbol of hope. It is a beacon of freedom and salvation for those fleeing from tyranny. Is that not the definition of jingoism? It very literally is. So why doesn't Casablanca carry the same reputation? I absolutely want to talk about that more as we go. I want to dig into that.
That is a great
because
question.
the film
dude.
is adamantly holding up a microscope to America's decision to abandon its isolation and join the war effort. That is what this film is. But people don't talk about it the same way they do Mrs. Miniver. I find that contrast incredibly interesting. But it's weirdly doing the same thing. Now, we can get into why one is looked that way, why one isn't. Again, I do want to talk about that, but I found that really compelling on this rewatch. I couldn't help but really hold on to that as I was watching the film. And I think that is our way in here to maybe bring something new to the conversation. Because, yes, as a film, it has all those classic components that we've alluded to. It's great. We can certainly talk more about that as well, because it is a masterpiece of a film. But the context in which it's made and its legacy, I think to me that's where the most riveting conversation is perhaps today.
It really is a great question, and perhaps we should start there, because it's a really great talking point. It is something I did ponder on a little bit, but not quite as forcefully as you have, and I think it is a worthy forcefulness that you're bringing to that question, because you're right. Between Casablanca and Mrs. Miniver, they're not concluding all that differently. They do have similar projections of hope and involvement in this war effort.
Yeah.
So what is the difference? Is the big difference that Casablanca also functions as a very successful romance film that basically allows us to find some sort of internal relatability to that idea and that conflict, that it's not just about the war effort, it's really just about holding on to your own ethos as a person and looking out for other people in a general sense. Maybe you can look at the film in a more high-level way, as opposed to something Mrs. Miniver, which literally concludes with a speech that was broadcast over radio because of President Roosevelt, right? That final speech was turned into a jingoistic message. And I think maybe the film's reputation has been morphed for that reason. But is the film on its own terms in a vacuum doing anything that much differently than Casablanca? That is a great question to ponder on. So what is the difference? Maybe it is the romantic angle, like I said. Maybe it's also the fact that it's an American perspective as opposed to the British perspective of Mrs. Miniver.
That's a great point too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and given Britain's involvement in the war at that time and the fear of their involvement, that may have, I guess, twisted the narrative a little bit. Because what's really interesting about Casablanca, this came out in 1942 at a time that France was pretty heavily occupied by German occupation. I think they were fully occupied by, or not fully occupied, but the northern and southeastern regions of France were mostly occupied by 1942 by both the Germans and the Italians, right? So that was definitely a big talking point here. But the thing that made Casablanca interesting is how predictive it was. One of the lines of dialogue that really struck with me was when I forget who it was, but it's someone that tells Rick, "Welcome back to the fight. This time I know our side will win."
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the film. Yeah.
And that is kind of a jingoistic thing, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But like, is that sense of heroism there and the predictive nature of it? I mean, the predictive nature is not the reason why it won Best Picture. That was certainly a lucky accident that happened. But it's interesting looking at the film now through that lens, knowing the outcome of World War II and how predictive that an exchange like that could have been, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting at the very least.
Yeah, no, you make some really great points there that I do find compelling. In order to perhaps reach a conclusion or find some sort of clarity as to the question that I pose in my opening thoughts there, I do want to talk about this film as propaganda, give some context and how I see the film working in terms of those propagandistic qualities. Famously, Jack Warner, obviously the owner of Warner Brothers at the time, and Hal Willis, who was the producer on this film, they were strongly in favor of American intervention in the war.
Right.
So its political themes and symbolism are not accidental. For as much criticism as Mrs. Miniver gets for its propagandistic qualities, and to be fair, it is more blatant in that film, but Casablanca is equally propagandistic in its messaging.
For sure.
Especially when you look at something like, and this is historical context I'm going to bring to it now as well, the Office of War Information. Well, what is that? Okay, this is something that was developed by the government in the early 1940s as a way to convince the American person that this war is a good thing, or that we need to get involved.
Yeah.
There's a really fascinating quote from Elmer Davis, who was the leader of the OWI, who said this, quote, "The easiest way to inject a propaganda idea into most people's minds is to let it go through the medium of an entertainment picture when they do not realize they are being propagandized," end quote. In other words, they wanted to find the concoction of Hollywood magic with covert messaging. And this is something we saw a lot during that era where films would adapt that philosophy. You think of something like Sergeant York, Caught in the Draft. There are more, again, blatant examples of this, but this also includes Casablanca. And you look at that through the prism of the film's isolationism as exemplified in Rick. Well, the first shot of Rick in this film is him playing chess, a game that requires strategy and precision. But in the shot, we see that he's playing alone.
Yeah.
So the symbolism there is not subtle. And not only is there a remoteness to Rick, but despite turning away a German banker early on in the film, he is depicted throughout as being neutral. He allows Nazis and refugees to coexist in his bar at the same time. And how many times in the film does he say, "I stick my neck out for nobody"? He
you can
says
make a
that
drinking game
often,
out of it.
and it's something the police chief claims is a quote unquote wise foreign policy. Again, I don't know about the subtlety there. And that happens a couple of times. But as the narrative unfolds and he witnesses the increasing intensity of Heinrich Strasser, we do start to see the cracks in Rick's armor, which leads him to manipulate a roulette wheel for a struggling couple.
Right.
Soon after, he allows the French national anthem to drown out the Nazi troops who are indulging in their own patriotic song.
Right.
And then, of course, in the end, he takes action against Strasser himself and actively takes a role in not only opposing Nazism, but allowing Victor and Ilsa to escape. The evolution of Rick from isolationist to active fighter is methodical and precise, and it pivotally mirrors America's lead up to the war, who obviously for a couple of years, they were very anti getting into the war again. Until it came to a point where they had to draw a line in the sand, which is why the film is remarkably similar to Mrs. Miniver, because as we talked about, Mrs. Miniver wasn't about, hey, we need to join the war, as England was already at war. And even the U.S. had just entered the war. It was more about maintaining resolve, although I did push back against that a little bit last week. But that is ultimately what its jingoistic qualities come down to. And that's kind of what this film is suggesting as well. The U.S. was already at war, so they didn't need to convince Americans to join the fight. It was about why they were at war and convincing audiences that standing up for justice, despite the cost, is the right thing to do. And I just think it's really funny how this film doesn't carry that same reputation.
I think to answer this question fully, we would need a DeLorean to travel back in time because I say that facetiously, but I also mean it somewhat seriously, because when you first enter a conflict like this, a lot can change in just 1 year. The perspective can fully change. And at the time that Mrs. Miniver came out, while yes, the involvement of the war was certainly apparent, it was still sort of a fresh idea. Whereas Casablanca maybe comes out a year later and has this sort of, not just this need to get involved, but this sense of hope that we actually could win this thing.
And sorry to cut you off real fast, but to give some specific context to the timeline there. And in war, every minute, every week, every month counts. There's a lot that can happen over the course of a short amount of time.
Right.
However, for context, in the summer of 1942, that's when Mrs. Miniver comes out, as we noted last week. Casablanca actually has its premiere in November of 1942, and has a theatrical release in January of 1943, which is really fascinating when we get to the Oscars part of this, like it for it to hold up over the course of that entire year. So the release between the two films is actually about 6 months. It's, you know, and the war would obviously go on until 1945. So for all the historical context we noted last week that was so important to the discussion around Mrs. Miniver is still quite applicable to Casablanca as well, because we're a year and a half until D-Day when this film comes out in January of 1943. So there's still a lot of uncertainty.
Do you think as things were shifting and our involvement began to increase even more so in the year 1943, that is more or less what gave Casablanca its legs? I think of it in a similar way, maybe not quite in the same historical way, but in a similar way that movies like Titanic got a very weird release, but yet it had such a longevity that it was going on to win. Or actually, maybe Titanic isn't the best example. Wasn't Gladiator a film that came out pretty early on in its respective year, but audiences just kept a hold of it for so long that it ended up winning like 9 months later or something like that.
Perhaps,
I don't know if Titanic or Gladiator are the right examples, but there are movies that have had that sort of trend, that sort of longevity.
Everything Everywhere All at Once recently.
That's okay. That's maybe a better example. That one had a release at the right time.
Yeah, like March, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm wondering if it makes me wonder if Casablanca or Mrs. Miniver came out at different times, what would have changed? Because I actually think the perception would have changed. I think
very possible.
I think the jingoistic qualities of Mrs. Miniver really apply because of when that film specifically came out in relation to our involvement in the war. I think if that film came out a little bit later, it would have been perceived a little bit differently. But I also think there is this sense of fear and this sense of tragedy with regard to Mrs. Miniver that Casablanca doesn't quite have. Like there's more of a hopefulness to that one. I feel like that maybe did a great job making Americans at the time feel a little bit better about their involvement in the war, a little bit more optimistic about how the outcome could be. And maybe that could have been the difference. I think at the right time, that certainly could have helped.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. And maybe I would also point to, and I know I said this in passing, but maybe I should put more weight on it, the blatancy of the propaganda in Mrs. Miniver, because that is a film where the war comes to their literal doorstep.
Right.
And then you get that speech at the end, which, as you noted, we talked about it last week, politicians, the president, most notably, utilized in other contexts outside of the film. Casablanca doesn't really have that. This, on its face, on the surface, simply plays out as this urgent, somewhat political thriller.
Yeah.
Where they have these letters of transit and who's going to use them, who's going to escape, who's going to be stuck in Casablanca. Now, it all does kind of tether back to the war and the occupation that Germany had over Europe at that time. But on its face, that propaganda, you don't really sense it. You don't really feel it.
I was just going to
say, peel back those layers and you start to look at the symbolism of Rick, his isolationism, as we just talked about, and how toward the end of it, he finally sees that he has to take action, because ultimately at the end of this film, the movie's overarching call to action is that neutrality is not an option and sacrifices have to be made. It's about standing up to tyranny, overcoming that, being there for the vulnerable and the needy. Right. And that was ultimately the ethos that America took into the war. And they wanted Americans back at home to have that same ethos as well, and support the soldiers through that lens.
Exactly. It's not dependent on the war, as Mrs. Miniver was. Like, that movie functions because of the setting, the sense of place, the war historical setting is why that movie.
It's
Mrs.
lingering
Miniver,
in the background in this film.
It's a character in the movie.
Absolutely. But it is distant, which is why, setting this in Morocco of all places is probably a smart idea. It's not on your doorstep in London, as we see in Mrs. Miniver. We're away from the war. There are refugees. Now, Nazis are clearly in the area. They still hold some sort of stronghold on the territory. Yeah. But the war isn't at their doorstep yet. But it's close enough. The tyranny is still there that people want to get out of Casablanca. That's why these letters are so important. People want either some sort of visa to get away, as we see with the young couple, or these letters of transit, which will get them back to America. And that's where they're going. They're going to America because that is the place of hope. That's where we can find refuge. That's where we can find salvation. Yeah. Which, again, I just find hilarious because that is the literal definition of jingoism.
It does make me wonder if there are maybe similar emotive themes that could be taken from Casablanca that maybe Americans at the time were able to tailor to, let's say, World War I, which they had already experienced. I don't know what that is, which is why I would love to be a fly on the wall during those conversations in the 1940s, 1930s, even back before that too, just for comparison's sake. But yeah, like I said, with Casablanca, it's not necessarily as dependent on the war backdrop as Mrs. Miniver was. Mrs. Miniver, like, the movie is about war. Casablanca is about war, but it's a little bit more indirect with that in some ways, which is why I say
it's
maybe
all symbolic, really.
It is. And it's interesting. You talk about how the film isn't subtle, yet at the same time, I think some of its war messaging is a little bit more subliminal when compared to
it is. Like, it's both obvious, but I'm also, that it could be myopic of me to say that because it's obvious in the through the lens of 2024.
Oh, it is. It is.
1942 or early 1943, it might not have come across that same way. And they didn't have a Roger Ebert that they could watch on the national televisions to spoon feed that to them. Not that Roger Ebert ever did that, but
that's so interesting. I know he loved it.
They didn't have this podcast to listen to, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh man, we should send this back in time for them, shouldn't we? But anyway,
audiences wouldn't have, and I don't want to diminish them either. I don't want to say that they weren't clever enough to figure it out. A lot of them probably very much are able to, but you are right. Like, the messaging here is obvious, but it is in execution. It's much more subliminal comparatively to something like Mrs. Miniver, which was more blatant, more in your face, very transparent. And this is carrying its message through its characters, through the actions they take. Again, Rick is, he has his bar that is American Cafe. He is representative of America. And so there is that transition where he's stuck in his neutrality, but through a series of events where he sees the tyranny up close, where he starts to lose that a little bit. Again, the cracks in the armor start to show themselves. And as a result, it comes to a point where he does have to choose. And that was ultimately where America found themselves. They were maybe neutral to begin with, but eventually it came to them. The war came to them, and they had to make a choice. Now, there's no exact Pearl Harbor moment in this film in terms of something happening to Rick directly. It
was just something that was always there that he was maybe hiding from.
Well, I think that comes through specifically through the actions of Major Heinrich Strasser, again played by Conrad Veidt here, who is this Nazi officer. He's there on the hunt for the Victor Laszlo character.
Right.
And through his actions, through Strasser, he starts to see the oppression and the stronghold he really has. And that's where that facade of Rick starts to kind of fall apart a little bit. So that to me, I think, is where the symbolic parallel between Rick and America as far as where is the Pearl Harbor here. I think that's where you can draw that line.
It's more human than it is event based. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm with
and
you.
again, that's where it's not obvious. Where in Mrs. Miniver, a literal German soldier comes to her house.
Well,
so like that's
like,
and that's probably the difference. But and again, let me be clear. I love Casablanca. I think it's a masterpiece. It's one of the best films ever made. I'm just trying to dig into this movie to find why it, because I do think this equally is propagandistic for all the reasons that we're talking about here.
Well,
but people don't look at it that way.
Well, and I think it comes down to the subliminal nature of how it's depicted when compared to Mrs. Miniver. Because when we watch both of these movies now, and maybe it was like this at the time as well, I don't really know. This is why I would love to be a fly on the wall during the 1940s when both these films came out. Because I look at Mrs. Miniver now, and I see that strictly as a World War II movie. Like, that is what it is. And Casablanca is absolutely a World War II movie, but I don't need to only enjoy it as that. I can see it
for
as
sure.
I can see it as a
Absolutely.
movie about fighting back against political corruption in a general sense.
Or tyranny, broadly speaking.
I could also look at it as a parallel for the refugee crisis, right? And this is why I brought up
it's
America's
much more universal, no doubt.
yeah,
about
and this is why I brought up the idea of America's experience with World War I, for instance. Is there anything relatable that they can take away from Casablanca that reminds them of their historical past, even at that time in 1942 when this came out? Because I don't think Mrs. Miniver has that ability. I think that's a film that functions strictly in the moment that it came out. But Casablanca, I think, has a certain level of, I don't even want to say superficiality to it, because that sounds like I'm underplaying the film. But I think the word is universality that you were talking about there. I think Casablanca has that it doesn't only need to be enjoyed on its merits as being a World War II film. And I think that's the difference.
Yeah, and I think that's very fair. I would still argue that Mrs. Miniver could perhaps still be applicable despite its specific references, given its fundamental idea of, fighting for justice. And that's ultimately what that film is trying to get at as well. But you are right. When it's so prominent, the soldier at her house, the specific impact that Dunkirk has on Mrs. Miniver as well.
Yeah.
That whole sequence in the film. It like World War II is, slathered all over that film.
Yeah.
The only time I guess where that gets specific in Casablanca is with the Nazis in the bar.
Yeah.
But that could be in lieu of any tyrannical organization. You could substitute that again.
Well,
I guess.
and the fact that it takes place in a foreign land that is very alien to many American audiences at the time. We talked about this taking place in Morocco, which is very uncommon for a war film even at this time, right? And it's sort of portrayed as like this neutral zone in a way, which is really interesting.
Sort of. I mean, I noted earlier, like, it's still German occupied, but the war hasn't come to the doorstep of Morocco yet.
Right.
So the Nazis are there, and the tension is high enough that people want to get out. And that's the brilliance of how this film utilizes World War II in order to have a dramatic bite, but it doesn't have to bring the war directly to Morocco.
Yeah. But I think by taking place in a setting like Morocco, something that's a bit more, it almost feels more jungle-like when compared to other movies maybe at that time, even though that's not the best way to put it. I mean, but I'm trying to say that as a comparison's sake, because on its face, Casablanca also feels like a traditional adventure film of the time. And I think some of those tones, I think, allowed those propagandistic ideas to feel even more subliminal because of how the film is functioning as a movie. Like the way the film functions as a movie, it just has these qualities that make it so, like, it almost feels like it could have been dubbed a blockbuster for its time. Like, it has that certain kind of energy to it, even though it's really only like 2 really long scenes. It's really the entire length of the movie, but it sort of has this this adventure-like quality, just given the energy and the aura of it. And maybe that gave it a different lens for when it came out. I'm not really sure.
No, yeah, I think you make some great points because, again, the only direct references aside from the Nazis in the film, which again you could substitute, and the only other one is in the flashback scene. They're in Paris when
Yeah.
Germany invades.
Right.
So there's a specific reference there. But broadly speaking, I do agree that the bulk of the film is about the drama inside Rick's bar, the political tensions. Again, you could substitute that depending on the circumstances and
Sure.
how things are playing out today or whatever timeline you want to look at. And there's the romance of it. I mean, there's a classic Hollywood movie romance here between Rick and Isla, but they don't end up together, which I think is fascinating with how that, even though that's fascinating on its own, it does tether to the political tensions of the film. And I do want to talk more about that as well as it goes. But you are right. Like so much of how this film plays out, there is an adventurous spirit there. It has this noirish spirit to it as well.
Oh,
you know, there's this tension throughout. So there's a dramatic bite to it. So like, yeah, you could just look at this film on its face, which is why I wanted to note in my opening thoughts, this is popular popcorn entertainment at its finest. You can simply watch it as that and enjoy the film. And perhaps you can exchange context if you want to look at it through a prism of 2024. But you throw in all of that political context of its time, and it just adds a whole nother layer.
It adds so many layers. That's why I think it might be the most influential movie ever made. Honestly, when we look back on it, and not just given how ahead of the curve it was in almost hopefully predicting some of the outcomes of World War II, given the whole involvement and everything, but just stylistically and from a genre standpoint, if you want to make a list of the greatest romance films ever made, you could probably find room for this one. If you want to make a list of the greatest adventure films ever made, you could probably make room for this one. A list of the greatest film noirs, you can probably make room for this one. A list of the greatest war films, you can. Casablanca is an all-encompassing movie-going experience. It's everything all at once. And I think that's that is what makes this movie so fascinating as well. Is in addition to everything we're talking about, given the circumstances of when it came out and how it came out, but the fact that it was so ahead of the curve stylistically and what it led to is just amazing. It's just so cool to see.
It's an immaculate concoction of filmmaking, and I think that's what makes these characters so hypnotizing. What's great about Rick, and again, this is a mixture of Humphrey Bogart's performance and the brilliant writing of this film. Yeah, because we're told at one point that he is this idealist. We learn through exposition he fought against tyranny before his time in Casablanca. But he's covered that now in thick cynicism, which, as we find out, is born out of heartbreak and war once again pulsating through Europe. It's a facade that gradually dissolves over the course of the film. But even in the middle, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, you do start to see the cracks. There are a couple of moments where people, or maybe it was just the Captain Renault character, I'm trying to remember here, who call him a sentimentalist. They can see it. They know the truth. Rick might just be me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. He's bad at hiding his emotions. Okay. And they see it. They see that he's really a sentimentalist.
You can tell he's bottling something up.
He's bottling something up. And I think that's what's so great about Rick and the romance at the core of this film between him and Isla, and where it ultimately crystallizes in the end. I mean, I do love those flashback scenes. It's endearing. The "here's looking at you, kid," that whole line has become classic. And the ending of it wonderfully establishes his heartbreak. And I think the way that builds, especially when you couple it with the political tension at the core of this film, and the fact that they don't end up together, I think is great, because if he chooses Isla, it condemns Victor to die. Victor being this symbol of resistance and truth. So him sacrificing his love for the sake of Victor and Isla, it reveals his true character as he's choosing something beyond himself.
Right.
It is astonishing how the film is able to bleed what is there on the surface in terms of Rick, that facade, his heartbreak, which is born out of this romance he has with Isla, and how that bleeds through into the political tension of the film, because that's ultimately what he chooses at the end. It is personal, but he chooses to let her go partially because of love, partially because of how he cares about her.
Yeah, it's not there.
Primarily, the reason he lets her go is because what Victor symbolizes is the most important. And I kind of think that's somewhat what he's speaking to in that iconic moment, that last scene between the two of them. And he's talking to her about, one day you'll understand why we have to make this decision. Because this is bigger than the three of them, but because of the symbolic fortitude of an individual, and he saw it firsthand, which is why we need to bring up the whole national anthem scene. But him witnessing that firsthand gave power to that scene. So or that decision rather. So the film gets to have its cake and eat it too. Well, it is a powerful political thriller, a great romance and adventure movie. All together, like how they made that work it's just magic. It
does make me wonder, how would this film have been perceived if, let's say, Rick and Ilsa were the ones that got together in the end, because they are sort of the romantic kinship that, romantically speaking, you as an audience member are kind of rooting for, like just given the romantic angle here, if you want to judge it from a chemistry standpoint, like that's the relationship that the film is kind of pushing for. Yet by the time it reaches its end, in order for each character to come out good by the end, it has to end the way that it does. Otherwise, it becomes a completely different movie. It collapses on itself. And it's very easy to hate a character like Rick if it were to go that way. Because then all of a sudden you find a romance winning due to selfish reasons. And the film is about abandoning those selfish reasons.
Exactly. Sacrifice.
That's the whole point. Yeah.
Making a sacrifice. And that's where Rick as a symbol for America is really important.
Right.
And that's the messaging the movie wants to make. That at the end of it, again, circling back to the propaganda, everything is tethered together here. Rick has to make that sacrifice because as America, there's going to be cost.
Yeah.
There's going to be cost. Just like Rick losing Isla, there's going to be cost, but we have to make that sacrifice because there's something more important we have to fight for. And I think the film as a work of propaganda is striking. Again, I'm not saying any of this as a bad thing. I kind of love
interesting. It is so interesting
how the film
that way
gets away with that. And speaking of getting away, you were just talking there about Rick and Isla and the audience rooting for that romance. Especially in context of the Hays Code, which was still very active at this time as well.
Yeah.
It's incredible that this film is like, you're okay if this woman cheats on her husband, right? We're all cool with that? Good. Glad we're all on the same page here. We're all rooting for that. We're rooting for infidelity.
Yeah.
We love it.
But he did think he was dead. So I guess it's okay now.
Look, I get it. I know it's a little bit of that Pearl Harbor thing. Maybe we should all give Michael Bay a little bit more grace, I guess is what I'm trying to say here.
Can't do that for Age of Extinction, though.
No. No. But, the film does give a little bit of context. And there's also that moment where Victor asked her, did you get lonely when I was at the concentration camp? Yeah. And I love how that little moment is enough for us to be like, okay, problem solved here. Like, he's okay with it. We're good.
No, it kind of works. I don't know if it's the performances or what, but I mean, you that's the thing. The movie does seem to in a very tricky way, suggests that the Rick Ilsa relationship is the one we're supposed to be rooting for, but Isla and Victor are another great match in a lot of ways, right?
I agree.
Yeah,
No,
and I think that's the secret of
yeah.
the movie, working as a great love triangle more than anything else.
I completely agree. And all joking aside, while that could be looked at as a contrivance, that okay, Victor, he's aware of it, he confronts her about it, he's okay with it. I don't know about that. However, I do think it works here. Genuinely, I
Yeah.
think it's great because he is aware of how someone in her circumstance would feel lonely and want to have a companion,
Right.
given that he was in a concentration camp. Also, I think the reason he lets it slide, not as a contrivance for the movie, but similarly to why Rick chooses to let Isla go, the reason Victor lets that go is because he's fighting for something bigger beyond the two of them. He does love her. He admits that later on, and I think that's a genuine moment. And to your point about the performances here and the chemistry of Victor and Isla here, I think is also quite good.
Yeah.
That I believed that. I believed that he was willing to let that slide, that he does love her, but ultimately what he's fighting for is more important because it's more than just the two of them. It's beyond the two of them. There's so much more at stake that he can't get bogged down in her infidelity. And
This way, everybody wins.
everybody wins. And they get to fight for something that does have value and meaning.
Yeah.
And
And
again, the film gets to have its cake and eat it too.
And it is Victor the one that says to Rick, "Welcome back to the fight. This time I know we will win." I know I referenced that quote earlier, but I blanked that it was Victor that says that
Yeah, it
to
was
Rick,
Victor.
although I knew
Yep.
Rick was on the receiving end of that. And
Mhm.
I can't tell you a more historically predictive line of dialogue in a movie than that one.
Mm-hmm.
That is a wonderful piece of writing that accidentally became a wonderful piece of writing, I guess. But it is representative of everything that you're talking about with the film working as a film, and not just as a romance, but as a love of country, right? As a love of people. And I like that the film sort of, I guess, clouds what our traditional depiction of romance is to be a bit more high level and all encompassing than just between man and woman, right? I love that it's about people.
And if you want to look at the propaganda symbolism, it could also be reflective of, hey, as Americans, we can't get bogged down in these petty differences. We might disagree. Things might not always be okay. It's not to let it slide, like her infidelity. It's not to just make it okay for the sake of making it okay.
Yeah.
But there's something bigger here we have to focus on. And I think even in the context of its overarching messaging, I still think it very much works in that context as well. Like
I agree.
We
I
have
agree.
to unify here, and that is ultimately what you get there at the end. Even though there is a triangle of sorts, ultimately,
But no one's
there's
left hanging, right?
there's a unity
They
at the
remain
end of this
a
film.
unified triangle, even if there is a physical distance between
Yes.
them by the end.
Exactly. And I think one of the pivotal moments that helps bridge that gap with those three as well is the national anthem scene. I want to talk about that.
Might be
That
the
is an
scene of the movie.
incredible
Might be the
moment in this
scene,
film.
yeah.
It's intense, it's dramatically engrossing, it's emotionally gripping, especially because in the scene right before, Rick is still trying to maintain some sort of neutrality when he tells Victor that he can't give the letters to him because, quote unquote, the problems of this world are not his department, as he says. He's just a barman or what, however he articulates that. Yet, not only does he allow the house band to fight back by playing the French national anthem as soon as that exchange between him and Victor is over, he lets the house band play the anthem. And there's something about Victor as the leader of this underground movement standing by the band, leading the charge, and the energized crowd joining him passionately in that moment, that leads Rick to finally remove that neutrality. That to me is the moment where he realizes he has to take action. If it's not the Major Strasser character, as I referenced earlier, that might be his Pearl Harbor moment. That's where he realizes there's something bigger here and I can't be passive anymore. And it does change him.
This goes back to what we were talking about just earlier in this episode, why Mad Max Fury Road works so well. It's the way the musicality is able to shift and almost visualize the way characters look at one another, right? Because the musicality of this scene, and you cut that with insert shots of Humphrey Bogart and what he's going through as you're talking about, but also Paul Henry, who plays Victor. The moment of realization that they both have in that moment without speaking a word of dialogue about it, it's not direct in that way. You have this celebratory national anthem for France playing, and the way that these characters interpret it without saying that, I think, is why it works so well. What you're saying, it's in those performances and the performative instincts of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading that I guess many of the background actors there were actually refugees that had moved.
Well, that just
to
makes
the
this
United
movie even
States.
better if that was even possible.
Absolutely. So you get some of the shots there on the locals there on the bar that are joining Victor in this national anthem, and you really do see this conviction as they're singing the anthem. You see the passion, you see the deep emotion, just absolutely spilling out of them, and it's moving. It really is moving. To your point about what we said earlier about Mad Max Fury Road, it is extremely applicable here. Yeah, I mean, you see them singing the song, you hear the music, and how it's drowning out the Nazism that begins that scene. And I love how it follows Rick telling Victor, you can't have the letters. I'm sorry, I'm not getting involved. But as soon as he sees this moment, he knows that he can't.
Well, because in a way, while this wasn't an act of violence specifically or physical war, it was an act of defiance. So in a way, his approval of this musical performance specifically, it is him getting involved no matter what. Like this is his involvement now, whether he likes it or not. And that's not to say that he made a mistake or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But clearly he made this choice for a reason. And in that moment, he recognizes that, no, I can't shed this. I made this choice for a reason because I am still passionate about this cause. Well, I can't lie to myself anymore.
I agree. And I think a lot of that is born out of what we were talking about earlier, and that Rick has always been an idealist. He's simply masked that through his cynicism because of the heartbreak we noted earlier. Yeah. So I think he gives permission for the band there because that's always there in Rick. Yeah. It's always been there. And he needed an excuse to let that sentimentality, I guess, come to the surface a little bit.
Right.
And so he does. And then he, as we all were by the moment, we become moved. And we realize that we have to fight for something bigger. But yeah, I think that's just the brilliance of the storytelling. Again, going back to what I said at the beginning of this conversation, and Michael Curtiz's direction, particularly the editing and storytelling here is astounding. Like there's never a false note. Like the film moves from one moment to the next with extreme purpose and precision, and that methodical unlayering of Rick here, I think is really great. And it gives credence to every choice that he makes and why the film wants to unpack why Rick makes that choice.
I think it is really interesting that Michael Curtiz is a filmmaker here who has quite a few classics under his belt. He really does. Even just the year before this, when Mrs. Miniver won Best Picture, he had a film competing. That was Yankee Doodle Dandy.
Yes.
and then
Yeah.
goes on to make Casablanca. I think he certainly,
He did
got
well for
promoted.
himself. Yeah.
Yeah, he did pretty well. I haven't seen all of his films, but when I look at, some of his most popular films, I've of course not just seen Casablanca, but I've seen White Christmas. I've seen The Adventures of Robin Hood. Angels with Dirty Faces is a very good film as well. But there's quite a few here I have not seen. Maybe this is another great movie series idea here.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind digging into his films. I mean, he's made some really great films, some classics for sure. And even with this film, I do think his direction is maybe a little underrated because people talk about the performances and the writing.
There's so
like,
many
it's one-
other so many other things here that kind of suffocate the direction, right? Maybe not suffocate it, but the direction's very restrained, and I think that allows the dialogue and these performances and what's going on underneath to really shine through, and that's certainly what's very important.
Well, I would champion him, and I have been in this conversation for a couple of reasons. One element that we haven't really talked about too much here, the cinematography is breathtaking.
Gorgeous. Pretty gorgeous.
It is a gorgeous movie. I love the use of shadows here, especially on Rick and Isla throughout the film. They're constantly covered in these Noirish-esque shadows.
Yeah.
At the same time, you think about the lighting on Isla here, and the film renders this almost magic-like quality and how she is visually, given to us on screen. There's
the
an
most
innocence
beautiful
to her.
person in the movie.
Gorgeous. Yeah, like she's almost angelic. That's how I would describe her. She's angelic throughout this film. Extremely lovable. In contrast to Victor, who is incessantly shot with light. There are no shadows on him. He is a beacon of light throughout this entire film. There is so much visual information that the film gives us that you can't process it all in one viewing. You really have to see the film multiple times to really grasp how sensational the cinematography is here. It's fantastic. And then you couple it with the performances he gets out of his actors. And while the writing is excellent, as we noted earlier, not to take away from the screenplay, it is one of the best screenplays of its era of all time, as we talked about. But the editing and the storytelling here, which comes down to the direction, is immaculate. It is really fantastic. And that's one of the best elements of this film.
We talked about this film essentially being only 2 scenes, right? It kind of feels like a stage play without the staginess of it, right?
Which it was meant to be, right? Or at least
it was.
But
But we often criticize movies that were originally stage plays and then they were adapted for the screen, and yet they still feel too stagey, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't quite have the same cinematic language that I think a movie ultimately needs. This is a film that has a staginess without the staginess, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But in times, the whole movie almost feels like it flows like one continuous scene, which I often say is the best compliment I can give to a well-edited movie. If a movie is that well-edited, it almost flows like you don't even notice when scenes are cutting or changing. And that's exactly what's going on here. I think it flows perfectly in that regard.
Which is even more impressive because it's constantly flipping through other genres. At times it's film noir. In other moments it's German expressionism. It's melodrama. There are even documentary-esque elements to the film at times. It's a thriller and parts at the end. Yeah. Like it's mixing and matching all of these genre elements, whether that be tonally, visually, and yet it all feels of a piece.
Yeah,
to
it
your
does.
point, it's incredible how that works.
Which is why you're right that Michael Curtiz's direction here. First off, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name right. Is it Curtiz or Curtiz?
I think it's Curtiz. I've always heard it pronounced Curtiz.
I think that's what it is too. But it's just so easy to say Curtis when you're speaking so quickly.
Especially.
Anyway, Michael Curtiz. Michael Curtiz. I do think you're absolutely right in that his direction is sometimes lost in the shuffle when we talk about this movie. And when I said earlier that some of these other attributes like the performances and the script kind of overtake the direction. It's really just those are the loudest things about this movie, right?
Yeah.
That's what you latch onto more immediately. You see this movie for the first time, you're thinking of its script, you're thinking of its performances. And then you go back and look at it further and you realize this is actually a very well-directed movie. This whole thing is a well-oiled machine. And a lot of that does come down to the filmmaking as well, which it's a gorgeous movie, and that would always be immediate. You can always notice that right away if you're seeing it for the first time. But there's so many other things you might be able to latch onto first that you don't often realize Michael Curtiz is doing some immaculate things behind the camera.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's why you don't sense it's propaganda. I think that's ultimately what this comes down to is it's such a good movie that you don't really feel that messaging. And that's what makes, Elmer Davis and that quote I laid out earlier so brilliant.
For sure.
Because that's exactly what he wanted. He wanted to inject propaganda into movies in such a way that you do not realize that you are being propagandized. Casablanca is quintessentially that.
Which is so interesting because it's not hiding it, and yet somehow it tricked audiences into thinking that it's hiding. I mean, it's not hiding it, but it is hiding it.
It's wild.
And that right there is the difference when compared to Mrs. Miniver, right?
That is
Mrs. Miniver. By the time it gets to that end, we talked about this when we reviewed the movie last week. That final monologue was written the day before they shot it.
Yes.
And that's because of what was going on in real time.
Yes.
That was not an accident. They are not hiding that whatsoever. That is not subliminal. But there is something very subliminal about Casablanca. It's almost like the gold standard of when movies started to be very smart and cryptic with how they communicated theme and symbolism, right? Like there is really an artfulness to this movie that, again, influenced maybe other artful movements in the way that movies were treating certain symbols and themes and how cryptic that they could be. This, in some ways, Casablanca started that movement as well, very ahead of its time.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I'm not to diminish audiences at all of the time in 1943 or now even, but the general audience, the accountant down the street with a wife and 3 kids,
right,
when they're going to see this film, they're likely not going to engage with it the way that you and I are now, at least not immediately. No. They might go to the bar over the weekend, talk about it with the friends, perhaps. I don't know if they're having these exact conversations. And when
I want to go back in time so bad,
I know, it's interesting, and obviously I'm stretching here because I don't know. I wasn't around in 1943, but
really?
we see this today. We see this today where audiences see a movie, they go home, and I'm talking about general audiences, not critics or cinephiles. Yeah. General audiences, they see movies. They don't really wrestle with it the same way we do. They experience it, they like it or they don't, and they go home. And you compare that with Mrs. Miniver, where you get that last speech at the end, and it's so blatant that even that same person can go, oh, I recognize that. I know what that is.
Yeah.
I see that. I'm inspired by that. I can fully wrap my mind around that. And that is really the difference, where it is covert here. It is. And that was ultimately the point. They didn't want to make it blatant and obvious like Mrs. Miniver. And that's probably why politicians, the president, can take a speech out of context in Mrs. Miniver and use it for their own purposes.
Yeah, you can't really do that here.
It was effective.
There's no moment in Casablanca that you can just
can't do that
from this and just broadcast over the radio in 1942.
Yeah, the president isn't going to get on the airwaves and go, here's looking at you, kid.
And all of a sudden we are inspired to win the war.
I'm going to talk about Rick's isolationism, okay? Well, let's have a chat about that. Like, no, he's not going to do that. That would have been awesome, but no, that's not going to happen.
Oh, imagine the president reviewing a movie. It's like Barack Obama reviewing movies. I feel like he'd be a great movie critic. Maybe not Roosevelt, but Barack Obama for sure.
Yeah, for sure. At any rate, a lot of words to get to that conclusion, and I always knew we would get there in the end, but I really wanted to dig into that as much as possible because
It's a great question.
I do feel like it's something that isn't talked about as much with this film. It's certainly there. We're not the first to bring it up, but
yeah. But yeah, in relation to Mrs. Miniver winning Best Picture just before this one, it makes for an interesting situation, interesting circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts on Casablanca?
Amazing movie. Amazing movie. I mean, what else? I mean, we didn't really talk much about Ingrid Bergman. That I mean, we talked about Ilsa and how great the character is, but we haven't really highlighted her performance as much as I think we should have. I mean, she's so radiant here. You're right that they light her in a way that she's almost angelic. She's told that she is the most beautiful woman in that bar, and the movie goes out of its way to visualize her as the most beautiful woman in that bar, and she absolutely is. She lives up to that reputation.
Yes.
But it really is a great performance.
And it's the expressions. Like she has dialogue, of course, but I feel like her most impactful moments are simply when the camera lingers on her and you see her eye work, such as when she asked for Sam to play as time goes by and he starts to play and you just see her eyes shift and it's like you see her entire life flash there on the screen, even though that doesn't happen obviously, but she gives you that in her performance. Like just in a little facial tick like that, she's able to meticulously give us so much. It's just incredible stuff.
Yeah, you know, another performance I do want to highlight here quickly is Peter Lorre or Lorre. I think it's Peter Lorre, who plays Ugarte. You want to talk about desperation that comes through in a performance. It certainly comes through in him. I usually always associate his very unique look with movies like, let's say, Fritz Lang's M, I believe he was in. So like that he, and even earlier Hitchcock film, The Man Who Knew Too Much, before he remade it with Jimmy Stewart. He's got a certain look to him that's very unique, right? But he embodies desperation in the small amount of screen time he has here in Casablanca in a way that is very palpable. In a way, he's kind of the unsung hero in setting the tone for this world in a lot of ways. We get some narration and exposition to lay the groundwork, the historical groundwork specifically, but the emotive groundwork is really set because of Peter Lorre's performance. That sense of desperation and isolation, I think, is all because of him. So I wanted to highlight that as well.
Yeah, no, he's really great. I agree. I really liked Conrad Veidt in this film as well. I've noted Heinrich Strasser a couple of times. I think he has to offer that intimidating presence. That the Nazis are there. They do have a stronghold in the area. Even if the war isn't in Morocco yet, they're there and people are aware of it and they want to get out. They want to get out. And so I think he brings that to the film in his performance as well.
For sure.
Claude Rains as Captain Renault, really fun. As this opportunist, he swings like a fart in the wind. He'll go wherever the opportunity takes him. And I love that about the character.
I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Oh my gosh. And it took us to the end of the conversation to get to that
finally
moment.
Acknowledge the other line of dialogue that has become so like
ending of this
ingrained in like pop culture mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible how much iconography this film has just in the final 10 minutes of the movie.
Just in its words.
The final 5 minutes of the movie.
We normally associate iconography with with physical stuff that you see on screen, right? But here's a movie that uses words to depict its iconography even further. It's
the
for lack of a better term, it's iconic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean the dialogue from Rick to Isla there, even the shot of the plane, I think has some impact on the culture as well. And then, of course, that last line of dialogue. I mean, there's so much about this film that is iconic, and yet I feel like some of its most iconic moments. I mean, even here's looking at you, kid. Even though we saw that earlier in the film, most people will point to the last use of it as the most iconic.
I know.
Like usage of that line in the film.
It's interesting going into the movie for the first time. I didn't see this for the first time for this conversation. I've seen the film many times.
Sure.
But if you were to go into the movie for the first time, by this point, you've most likely heard of that line. Here's looking at you, kid. But then when you hear it for the first time, it probably comes way earlier than you would expect.
Exactly.
And then it comes again. And then it comes again. I think it's uttered 5 times in the movie. Or maybe 4 or 5, somewhere around that, which sort of like pulls the rug from under your feet as someone that knows its reputation, but not really its context in the movie.
Yeah.
And when you get to that last one, it's sort of this revelatory moment.
It's so good.
That's the one
so
that's
good.
the reference, isn't it?
Like, I love it. Like the way the film builds to it is immaculate. It's cinephile gold. Like it's just filmmaking at its best. I love it.
And I wasn't kidding earlier when I said that I think every movie post 1942 was influenced by Casablanca. Earlier this week, just for fun, my wife and I were watching The Mask, the Jim Carrey film. And the scenes in the nightclub in that movie, I'm thinking, why does this remind me of Casablanca? It's like little things like that. I'm realizing every movie owes a debt of gratitude to Casablanca. I think it does.
It's great. And it's amazing how influential it's become. And, it's Hollywood royalty, yet it was also used as covert propaganda.
Yeah.
I just find that irony incredible. Just incredible.
It's amazing.
It's so good.
Amazing.
But as a movie, it really is immaculate. It's so good for all the reasons we talked about. I guess the last thing I'll note, the song As Time Goes By, also iconic.
Beautiful.
Love the use of that here. Gorgeous.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I'm with you as well.
Love this film. Let us know. You there's no way you disagree with anything we had to say, but I guess if you do, if you agree or disagree with anything, leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please reach out to us on social media, or you can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. What a fun conversation. I enjoyed that immensely.
We dug deeply for that one.
We did. So we have now done 4 films. We are moving on to Going My Way, which won the Oscar for 1944. And what's interesting is that that is the first year where they go down to 5 nominees for Best Picture.
That's true.
So much less to compete with. However, some pretty good films there that Going My Way did compete with. We'll talk about that next week. And I believe I noted this already here on the show. That is a blind spot for me. Going My Way, I have not seen.
I've not seen it either, so that'll be a fun conversation.
So really
I have seen some of the films it competed against, so it'll make it a fun conversation for sure.
Absolutely. With all of that said, I'm really having a lot of fun with this movie series so far.
Yeah, we're almost at the halfway point. Can you believe it?
For the 40s.
Well, for the 40s, yeah. We're probably in actuality, we're what, like maybe 3%.
We're like 5% in. Yeah, maybe not even that. Yeah. I do want to plug our review this week for I Saw the Glow. I had a really great conversation with music critic Hannah Jocelyn, who joined me for that conversation. She writes for Pitchfork and Them and a few others, but she's wanted to dabble into film criticism.
Yeah.
And she has her own newsletter. Transient Peak is the name of it. transientpeak.ghost.io, I believe, is the link.
Right.
And she wrote about I Saw the Glow as a trans person. I was very, very excited to go and check out her work or her written review there. I thought it was great. I wanted to invite her onto the show here to get her trans perspective on that movie.
Yeah.
And we had an awesome conversation. It was really, really fun.
I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, she was fantastic. So I definitely urge people to go and check that out. That is available right now. We released that yesterday, so it's already up on our feed. Again, whether that's here on YouTube or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it's already there. If you subscribe, you can go and check that out.
Was a great conversation. Love getting that perspective as well. And I have not seen the film yet. I'm very much looking forward to it, given the review that you guys had.
Absolutely. I do look forward to hearing your thoughts as well,
Mm-hmm.
because spoiler alert, it is one of my favorite films of the year so
I
far.
saw that
I think
too,
it is
yeah.
really, really great. So
That's all I'm hearing. That's all I'm hearing about it.
really excited to hear your thoughts. We will, of course, have a review for Furiosa coming soon as well. I noted earlier, I'm going to be at Disney this weekend, so I don't know when that episode is going to be released. We are planning to record it early next week, so it should hopefully come out around the same time they normally do. But just in case, a fair warning there. But we'll have a review for Furiosa coming soon as well. Be sure to check out Chasing the Gold, Women in Session. They've had new episodes recently as well.
Yeah.
Again, if you subscribe to our show, you'll see all of that on our feed there. But definitely want to shout those ladies out.
Yeah.
And of course, check out the stuff on the website. Want to shout out Dave Giannini. He's always doing fantastic work. We
He's
love
a busy man. We're lucky to have him.
Doing awesome stuff. We have a writer, Hector, is over at Con right now, writing reviews for us at InSessionFilm.com.
Yeah.
If you want to go and check
Thankful
out
for him.
his Con stuff. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is it. Again, just a reminder to subscribe to the channel if you're listening here on YouTube, like the video, all that fun stuff. Reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. We're active on all of those platforms. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
Brennan, anything before we get out of here, my friend?
I think that pretty much covers it. Looking forward to the summer movie season continuing. I think we're at a point now where I feel like it's finally starting. It was sort of like this slow build to get to really where it feels like the summer season. I feel like things were not quite there yet, but I like the excitement as it's growing. And for those who actually watch us on YouTube, if you might notice, I might sometimes change positions in this new backdrop that I'm in. I'm realizing the angle that I'm at right now is not really the most comfortable, so I might end up shifting over here next time. So just be aware that if things kind of move around, it's not because it's an earthquake or anything like that. I'm just getting bored with the way it looks.
Yeah, and it's only temporary anyway, because in a couple of months he's moving.
I'm going to be house
get
prone.
too used to
We're
it.
going to be house prone.
Yeah,
I can't believe that happened. We had no idea that was going to happen. We did joke about it though, so it was weirdly serendipitous. We move out of our apartment. Our lease is up. We knew we did not want to renew because we just didn't want to be throwing money away in that kind of situation. We want to be able to build equity as everyone does, but the market here in Eastern Pennsylvania is not great. It's really competitive, really difficult. So we decided to move in with my in-laws, Maris's parents, and we jokingly said, "How much you want to bet?" After like a day or two, we're going to find a house, make an offer, we're going to get it. And that's exactly what happened.
You speak it into existence. Exactly. That's what you do.
You want to hear a fun fact? So right now, Maris's parents, we're in Westchester, Pennsylvania. It's very, very, very close to Philly. The house we got, I kid you not, JD, 500 feet from this current house.
Yes, you could just carry your furniture down the road.
We are going to have walkie-talkies, so when power does go out, we can still communicate. I jokingly said to Maris's dad that we're going to have like these powerful Nerf guns to just communicate back and forth or something. It's like, I'm not being hyperbolic here. It's 500 feet away.
No, that's great. And even though I joked earlier, I also wasn't joking. When you do have little Brendans running around, having them close by, world of difference.
That's what we talked about.
Absolutely makes a huge difference.
We bought a house that comes with built-in babysitters.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's what I absolutely love about my in-laws. Maybe not being 500 feet away, but they're certainly very close and are in our kids' lives every single day. And I don't know how we would function without them. Like you'd
have to make sacrifices, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
it changes everything for sure. But yeah, I do love hearing that, and can't wait for 11 months. That's what I'm giving it.
11 months. All right.
And
where's the calendar? I got to mark this down. On what is today? May 21st? Is that what today is?
That's or I'll give you to next August.
Okay.
Because that's when that's my birthday month, so it can come on my birthday.
Okay.
Happy birthday.
You're
to
welcome.
Me. Yes. Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit of leeway.
All right,
but I'm
fair
marketing on my calendar and patiently waiting.
That's when the announcement will come.
Exactly. At any rate, yes, some good times. Looking forward to the summer season.
Yeah.
A regurgitation of 2015, as
Apparently
Matt Negley had noted. I didn't even think about it until they did a post about it. But Inside Out, Mad Max Fury Road, both coming out in 2015, and we're getting sequels and this year to both of those movies.
That's weird, man.
It's kind of funny.
Weird.
And also, we're getting Jeff Nichols soon. I'm so excited. The Bike Riders next month.
We should have gotten that so much sooner. Oh man,
Can't
wait for that one.
Can't
wait for it.
At any rate, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for watching. We will see you all next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh man, Casablanca. That was a really fun conversation.
When they were talking about friendship at the end of that movie, we're talking about us.